My boss, Mr. Henderson, pushed a termination notice across his mahogany desk. "You're hindering progress with unnecessary concerns, Matthew," he stated flatly. "We need employees who prioritize deadlines above all else." I am Matthew Davis. At the age of 52, I've dedicated 3 decades to construction projects throughout the city of Great Falls, Montana. My career began as a laborer, culminating in my position as site supervisor at Pinnacle Construction. I understand the intricacies of a construction site, the hum of a perfectly functioning generator, the reassuring sight of a level foundation, the satisfying feel of correctly tensioned steel cables. More crucially, I possess the keen ability to identify potential problems before they escalate. For the past 4 months, I'd overseen the construction of the Grandview Corporate Center, a 10-story office building destined to be the tallest structure in the northern part of the city. The project was already behind schedule when they introduced Mr. Caleb Miller, a young project manager in his early 30s, recently hired from a prestigious firm in San Francisco. On his first day, he surveyed the site with a tablet, meticulously taking notes without physically interacting with any materials or meaningfully engaging with the crew beyond cursory greetings. "These temporary supports don't meet specifications," I informed him last week, pointing to inadequate bracing on the 4th floor. "We need to reinforce them before proceeding upwards." "The engineering team approved the current setup," he responded, eyes glued to his tablet without pausing the construction workflow. I meticulously documented everything: photographs, detailed notes, emails. Some might call it excessive documentation, but I simply consider it fulfilling my professional responsibilities diligently. Now seated in the site office, I observed Mr. Miller awaiting an explosion of anger that never materialized. Men of his type anticipate men of my experience to shout, to throw objects, to create a scene when confronted. I simply offered a curt nod and retrieved my hard hat. "I'll clear out my locker," I announced. "Your belongings are already packed," he replied, sliding a cardboard box towards me. "Security will escort you to your vehicle." I was being treated as a security risk, as if 3 decades of punctuality and dedication meant nothing, as if raising legitimate safety concerns somehow rendered me dangerous. I accepted the box without inspecting its contents, and followed the apprehensive young security guard to my pickup truck. Several crew members witnessed my departure and paused their work. I offered them a brief nod, not of farewell but of a different nature, a silent warning to be vigilant. As I drove away, I glimpsed Mr. Miller already conversing with my replacement. The man he spoke to nodded enthusiastically, likely promising to maintain the project's momentum at any cost. They wouldn't see the last of me, though they didn't realize it at that moment. My professional life has been dedicated to constructing enduring structures. My father, a master carpenter, instilled in me the understanding that shortcuts lead to weaknesses, and weaknesses ultimately result in failure. "Do it right the first time," he always emphasized, "even if only you recognize the difference." This philosophy garnered me respect from crews and contractors alike. However, it also cost me opportunities with companies that valued speed over quality. I had been terminated twice previously for insisting on proper procedures, but each time I secured another position within a few weeks. Skilled superintendents who genuinely prioritize code compliance are less common than one might hope. My wife, Sarah, always understood my convictions, even when they impacted our finances. "Your name is as much a part of that building as the developers," she'd remind me. "You have to be able to sleep at night." Pinnacle Construction was different. Initially, the founder, Mr. Arthur Blackwood, had established the company on a reputation for superior workmanship. I joined 7 years ago when they were a medium-sized firm, focusing on commercial renovations and smaller-scale projects. Then Mr. Blackwood retired, and his son took over. The company's size tripled, and suddenly, meeting deadlines surpassed the importance of adhering to proper procedures. The Grandview project was their largest endeavor yet, and the pressure from upper management was immense. The first warning sign appeared when they replaced our original project manager, Mr. Henry Carter, a seasoned professional I'd worked alongside for years, with Mr. Miller. "They're bringing in new blood," Henry warned me during his final week. "These young guns from big firms, they're solely focused on profits. Be cautious, Matthew." I nodded, failing to fully grasp the gravity of his warning. During Mr. Miller's first month, subtle corners were cut. Safety meetings were reduced from 15 minutes to 5. Material inspections became superficial. Documentation requirements were relaxed. When I voiced my objections, I was dismissed as old-fashioned and resistant to change. I began maintaining a separate log of all deviations from code and best practices. Digital photos stored in the cloud, copies of emails from my personal account, and audio recordings of conversations when legally permissible. The breaking point arrived when I discovered the use of inferior structural bolts on the 6th and 7th floors. The substitution wouldn't be immediately noticeable to an inspector without a thorough examination. But in the event of an earthquake or high winds, it could lead to catastrophic structural failure. We need to replace these, I told Mr. Miller, showcasing the comparison. He glanced briefly at the bolts in my hand and stated, "The supplier assured me they're within acceptable limits. We won't delay the steel crew for this." That exchange occurred 2 days before my dismissal. I drove directly home after being escorted from the site, the cardboard box resembling a silent passenger in my truck. Sarah wouldn't return from her shift at the hospital for several hours. I sat in my truck in the driveway, staring at the house we'd purchased 15 years prior. It required a new roof. I'd planned to install it myself that summer. Now I had the time, but perhaps not the funds. Inside, I placed the box on the kitchen table and finally examined its content. My thermos, a few reference books, a framed photo of Sarah and me at Yellowstone National Park. My personal tools were missing. A high-quality Milwaukee drill set, precision measuring instruments, specialized equipment I'd accumulated over decades, approximately $2,500 worth of tools. I meticulously listed all the missing items and contacted Pinnacle Construction's Human Resources Department. The woman who answered sounded uneasy as I explained the situation. "I'll investigate, Mr. Davis," she said. "However, I should inform you that according to Mr. Miller's report, you were terminated for insubordination and creating a hostile work environment." I hadn't raised my voice once in my interactions with Mr. Miller, not even that day. "That's intriguing," I replied calmly. "I'd appreciate that information in writing, please." "Excuse me, the reasons for my termination in writing, and the return of my tools. Otherwise, we can discuss this matter through my attorney." She promised to call back. I hung up and stared at my phone for a moment, before accessing my personal email. There, meticulously organized in folders, was every detail I'd documented over the previous 4 months. 78 distinct safety violations, ranging from minor to potentially disastrous, all supported by photographic evidence, all with records of my attempts to address them through official channels. It was no longer just about being fired. It was about the 250 individuals who would eventually work in that building. It was about the construction crew, unaware of the hidden flaws within the walls and beneath the flooring. It was about every compromised safety measure representing a potential lethal hazard in the future. Multiple critical safety violations at Grandview Corporate Center. I worked systematically categorizing violations by severity and type, cross-referencing code requirements and attaching supporting documentation. 4 hours passed before Sarah returned home and discovered me still working at the computer. "Wade, what happened?" I recounted the events while continuing to type. She stood behind me, her hands resting gently on my shoulders, reading the screen as I worked. "They'll fight back," she said quietly. "Let them. You might not find another job in this town." I paused, my hands hovering over the keyboard. "Some things matter more than a paycheck." She squeezed my shoulders softly. "I know, that's why I married you." Then I started another email to the State Building Inspector's office. 30 a.m. the following morning. "What in the world do you think you're doing, Matthew?" His voice was strained, controlled anger. "Good morning, Justin. I just received a call from OSHA regarding a complaint about our site." "Was that you?" I sat at the kitchen table, coffee mug in hand. "I documented legitimate safety concerns. That's all. You were fired for causing problems, and now you're proving me right." His voice softened, almost rational. "Look, Matthew, I understand you're upset, but this vindictive behavior won't help you find another position. In fact, I'm already receiving calls from other firms inquiring about you. The threat was clear: continue pushing, and I'd be blacklisted. If the site adheres to code, you have nothing to worry about," I replied. He chuckled, short and sharp. "We both know inspections can be subjective. One person's violation is another's acceptable variance. But what's not subjective is how the industry views disgruntled employees who attempt to sabotage projects after termination. Is that what happened to my tools?" I asked. "Sabotage." A pause. "What tools?" "The ones not returned with my personal belongings. I've already filed a police report for theft." It wasn't true yet, but his reaction revealed everything. "You know what? Keep the tools. Consider it severance. But drop this OSHA nonsense before you harm yourself. Goodbye, Justin." I hung up and immediately contacted the police department to file the report. They recorded the information but expressed little optimism about recovery. Next, I contacted 3 construction companies I had established relationships with to inquire about openings. 2 didn't return my calls. The third, Summit Builders, had the owner's son call me back. "I'd like to assist you, Matthew. I really would," he said. "But we're fully staffed right now, and well, there's been some discussion." "What kind of discussion?" "That you're difficult to work with, that you create problems." He sounded genuinely uncomfortable. "Look, I know my father respects you, but the industry is tight right now. Perhaps try again in a few months when this all subsides." By mid-afternoon, I'd received similar responses from 2 additional companies. News travels rapidly in construction circles, especially in a city the size of Great Falls. 15 p.m. My phone rang with an unfamiliar number. It was an attorney representing Pinnacle Construction. "Davis, I'm calling to inform you that any further communication from you regarding the Grandview project could be considered defamatory and result in legal action. Are you suggesting the company would sue me for reporting legitimate safety violations to regulatory authorities? I'm stating that your characterization of standard industry practices as violations seems retaliatory, considering the timing. Furthermore, you removed confidential project documentation when you left the company, which constitutes theft of intellectual property." I hadn't removed anything. All my documentation had been created on my personal devices and stored in my personal accounts, but they were laying the groundwork to discredit me. "Send me a formal cease and desist if that's your position," I replied. "Otherwise, I have nothing further to say." 3 days later, I received a thick envelope from their law firm. Inside was a cease and desist letter threatening legal action if I continued to disparage the company, along with a non-disclosure agreement they claimed I'd signed upon hiring. I hadn't signed any such document, but fighting this would require an attorney I couldn't afford. They were attempting to bury me before the inspectors even arrived on site. A week after my termination, I was at a downtown diner when Mr. Robert Jenkins, my electrical foreman on the Grandview project and a colleague for 15 years, joined me. "This is probably unwise," he said, glancing around. "Probably," I agreed, pushing my coffee cup aside. "How are things at the site?" "Chaotic. Mr. Miller is pushing everyone into overtime to rectify the issues before the OSHA inspection, scheduled for next Monday." I nodded. "They're replacing the bolts and reinforcing the supports I flagged. But here's the issue, Matthew." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "It's deeper than what you witnessed." He revealed a systematic pattern of falsified materials documentation over several months. He provided me with a flash drive containing copies of the original documentation compared to what had been submitted to inspectors. "Why are you doing this, Robert?" "You have a pension coming up in a few years. My son's firm will lease 3 floors in that building when complete, and I was raised to do what's right, same as you." I took the flash drive. "They'll figure out where this originated." "Probably, but I'm old enough not to care anymore." After Robert left, I went to the public library and used their computer to examine the files. The extent of the fraudulent activity was far worse than I'd anticipated. This wasn't just about Mr. Miller. It extended to the corporate level, involving purchasing directors and project executives. The Grandview project had been underbid to secure the contract, and they were compensating by using substandard materials. Driving home, I passed the construction site. The building had reached 8 stories, its steel skeleton rising against the Great Falls skyline. I considered all the people who would work there, unaware of the hidden dangers concealed within the walls and floors. When I arrived home, Sarah shared news of her own. She'd spoken to Mrs. Patricia Evans at the hospital, whose husband served on the city council. Mrs. Evans mentioned that Pinnacle Construction had made substantial campaign contributions to the mayor and several council members the previous year, right before receiving expedited approval for the Grandview zoning variance. The pieces were coming together: political connections, rushed approvals, cut corners, falsified documentation. This wasn't simply negligence, it was corruption. I contacted my OSHA contact that evening, leaving a voicemail message stating I had additional documentation requiring review prior to the inspection. Then I forwarded everything from Robert to both OSHA and the State Building Inspector's office. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Blackwood, the retired founder of Pinnacle Construction. "We need to talk, Matthew," he said, his voice grave. "This goes deeper than you realize." I met Mr. Blackwood at his lakeside home 30 miles outside the city. At 72, he still possessed the weathered hands and upright posture of a man who'd spent decades on construction sites before transitioning into management. "I should never have allowed my son to take over," he said, as we sat on his deck overlooking the lake. Thomas has always prioritized growth over quality, but I never imagined he'd go this far. You know about the falsified documentation? Mr. Blackwood nodded. I've been hearing things from old contacts. When your OSHA complaint arrived, several people called me. He took a sip of coffee. What you don't know is that Grandview isn't just another project for Pinnacle. It's the cornerstone of their bid for the new hospital expansion, a $150 million contract. I now understood their extreme reaction to my complaint. If OSHA uncovered serious violations at Grandview, they'd lose any chance at the hospital project. I've been gathering information as well, Mr. Blackwood continued. Thomas doesn't know I still have access to certain company accounts. I've documented irregular payments to city inspectors, the altered test results, everything. He met my gaze steadily. I built that company on my reputation. I won't let them destroy it or build death traps with my name attached. We spent 2 hours strategizing. Mr. Blackwood would approach the board of directors with his evidence, forcing internal action. I would work with OSHA to ensure a thorough inspection that couldn't be manipulated. The next day I received a call from a journalist at the Great Falls Tribune. Somehow she'd heard about the OSHA complaint. I'm working on a story about construction safety oversight, she explained. Your name came up as someone with concerns about the Grandview project. I was cautious with my words. I can confirm I reported safety issues through proper channels. Beyond that, I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. We've heard rumors about falsified safety documentation. Can you confirm that? Someone was leaking information, likely from city offices. I would encourage you to request public records related to the project's approvals and inspections. That's all I can say for now. The article appeared 3 days later, not naming me directly but mentioning serious allegations from a former site supervisor concerning structural integrity and documentation practices. By that afternoon, the mayor's office released a statement expressing complete confidence in the city's building inspection process and pledging transparent cooperation with regulatory authorities. The next morning, I received a text from Robert. OSHA is on site now, an unscheduled inspection, multiple inspectors. I smiled. The article had accelerated the process. 2 hours later, Mr. Blackwood called. The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm presenting everything. Thomas is taking the fall. He doesn't know yet. He's at the site dealing with the OSHA situation. Everything was unfolding faster than anticipated. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope to my house. Inside was a formal job offer from Landmark Contracting, a respected firm based in Missoula, with a branch office in Great Falls. The owner was an old friend of Mr. Blackwood's, though the letter didn't mention that connection. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Justin terminated, effective immediately. Corporate team on site taking over project management. Justice was swift once the chain reaction began. But I knew Pinnacle would try to minimize the damage by sacrificing Mr. Miller, while protecting the company's broader interests. They'd claim he acted alone, that corporate had no knowledge of his actions. That's why Mr. Blackwood and I had agreed on one final step. Tomorrow, he would provide all his documentation to the State Attorney General's office, along with a formal request for a criminal investigation into corporate fraud. The truth would emerge, regardless of who it harmed. 3 weeks after my dismissal, I stood at the back of the county courthouse meeting room as the Montana Department of Labor and Industry announced their findings. Reporters filled half the room, with Pinnacle executives and city officials occupying the front row. Thomas Stein sat stiffly beside the company's attorney, his face a mask of professional concern. He'd spent the previous 2 weeks portraying himself as the solution rather than the problem, publicly thanking whistleblowers for bringing isolated instances of non-compliance to light, and pledging full cooperation with authorities. The commissioner's voice cut through the murmurs. Following a thorough investigation, we have identified systematic and deliberate falsification of safety documentation at the Grandview Corporate Center. The violations are so severe that we're issuing an immediate stop work order on the project. Camera flashes popped as she continued. Furthermore, we're recommending criminal charges against 3 Pinnacle construction executives for knowingly jeopardizing public safety and worker well-being through fraudulent practices. One of those executives was Thomas Stein. I watched him lean over to whisper urgently to his attorney. The lawyer shook his head slightly. There would be no easy escape this time. Mr. Blackwood stood beside me, his expression grave but resolute. He'd sacrificed his relationship with his son to do the right thing. Neither of us derived satisfaction from Pinnacle's public downfall, but we both understood its necessity. The commissioner concluded by expressing gratitude to the whistleblowers whose documentation had been crucial in averting what could have been a future tragedy. She didn't name us, but Thomas turned in his seat, scanning the room until his eyes met mine. I held his gaze steadily, neither angry nor triumphant, simply a man who had fulfilled his responsibilities even when it cost him everything. Some principles are non-negotiable. 6 months after the Grandview scandal unfolded, I stood on the foundation of what would become the new Great Falls Community Hospital West Wing. My hard hat bore the Landmark Contracting logo, and my title was Senior Project Manager. The concrete beneath my boots had been poured according to precise specifications, with proper testing and documentation. Every stage of the process had been methodical, verified and executed correctly from the outset. The Grandview building had been demolished to its foundation, and was being rebuilt by a consortium of local construction firms under rigorous regulatory oversight. Pinnacle Construction no longer existed. The company dissolved after criminal indictments, and civil lawsuits made continued operation impossible. Thomas Stein accepted a plea bargain in exchange for testimony against other executives and the city officials who had turned a blind eye. Mr. Blackwood sold his retirement home to help establish a fund for construction workers who'd lost their jobs in the aftermath. Not everyone supported my actions. Some in the industry still viewed me as the man who brought down a major company and cost people their livelihoods. Others quietly thanked me for upholding standards that protected everyone. Robert Jenkins was now my electrical superintendent. Donna from purchasing had also joined Landmark Contracting. We'd recruited several skilled individuals who shared our commitment to proper procedures. Sarah and I had completed the new roof on our house, working evenings and weekends. The physical labor had been therapeutic after months of legal meetings and depositions. Ready for the inspection, my assistant inquired, approaching with a clipboard. Always, I replied. I learned that doing the right thing rarely comes without a cost, but I'd also discovered that I could sleep soundly at night, look my wife in the eyes, and face myself in the mirror each morning. Some victories are measured not in what you gain, but in what you refuse to compromise.